Hello, everybody out there in radio land. It is once again that time of the week where we come onto your radio dial and we talk about what's really going on out there in the city of Kalamazoo, the state of Michigan, the so-called United States, and the rest of the world from a working class perspective, breaking down what's going on in the mainstream corporate news media and analyzing it and essentially calling out the BS. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. We've got a lot to talk about on the show today. Obviously, we're going to be giving some critical updates about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. There's some important updates in regards to the recent sort of ceasefire resolution that's gone through the UN, as well as the recent story about what some legislation that has passed up in our neighbors to the north in Canada. We've got some critical Michigan news about both the Line 5 pipeline and how the tail end of federal COVID money is going to be affecting some of our education systems here across the state. We are going to be starting though. We've got kind of a breaking story. This is something that I came across yesterday, and come it's very close to home. Talking about a beloved Kalamazoo business. I kind of got tipped off to it by some friends of mine. I don't really use Reddit that much, but this has apparently been exploding all over Reddit. In regards to um, Kalamazoo's quite beloved coffee shop slash kind of Vine neighborhood destination, Crow's Nest. And there have been a lot of workers from Crow's Nest coming out of the woodwork to make some pretty serious allegations about what is going on over there, unbeknownst to most of the Kalamazoo community that comes in there on a daily basis, and yeah, just kind of combing through some of these allegations that have been made. It's a laundry list of just bad workplace experiences and grievances, really like a mixtape of them, if you will. And before I really kind of deep dive into these, I did want to just mention a couple things. So, one of the things that hit me when I was kind of doing some research for this piece before I decided to kind of talk about it on air, of course, you have to, uh, you know, figure out the validity of stories like these. If you're going to be talking about them on the public airwaves, which I've done my due diligence on that. But something that a friend and colleague of mine brought up was there was a very potent sense of disbelief. And we're talking about, in reference to Crow's Nest, some insanitary conditions, some of the treatment of the workers, etc. And a lot of the response, both on Reddit and Facebook, was this potent sense of disbelief. Like, can anyone prove this? Is this real? Etc. Are these and beyond like my capacity as somebody who's going to be talking about this radio, I kind of have to figure out the validity of these accusations and stuff. But why was it difficult, or should we say, why was there's this sort of response to these workers coming forward with these allegations is kind of almost defensive about Crow's Nest. And something that I'm going to be looping back to towards the end of this story is how Crow's Nest and Fourth Coast, it's more than just a business in the Vine. It really is a community institution. If you're an elder millennial like me, and well, heck, even if you were just, in the community as short as like 4 or 5 years ago, Fourth Coast, Crow's Nest really was the it spot. It was this epicenter of art and culture in the Vine neighborhood. And some of you you may remember, if you're a longtime listener, we did a piece several months back, kind of eulogizing the original owner um, of Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest. And a lot of what I talked about then was Fourth Coast and Crow's Nest as sort of a third space. What I mean by that and what a third space is, it's the idea that, there's two spaces that most people go spend most of their time at. It's work and home. A third space is a space in the community where you are out there with people from the neighborhood, people from your community, kind of out in a community activity, um, enjoying each other's company, playing board games, reading books together, conversating over a cup of coffee. That's what a third space is. And for many, many years, Fourth Coast was one of Kalamazoo's most legendary and kind of most nostalgic third spaces. And because of that, a lot of people have a very strong emotional attachment to Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest. Yours truly. I could speak as somebody, I've been going there since I was a teenager, which is going on 20 years now, just to age myself. Um, and some of my fondest memories were at Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest, sitting, studying, drinking coffee. Especially if you are younger and you don't remember, Crow's Nest slash Fourth Coast used to be a 24-hour location. And it's one of the few places in Kalamazoo where people could congregate at all hours of the day, especially a lot of college students who got to stay up late at night and study. Get your coffee in, listen to some good music, be in a nice little ambiance, maybe enjoy a muffin or some delicious breakfast food. But now that I've kind of, explained that a little bit, I think it's important, everybody, because as I'm going to relay some of these allegations, it is critical that our nostalgia is not used against us, or I should say, that nostalgia is not used against the workers, because it'd be a very easy thing to kind of weaponize this type of nostalgia we all have for the Fourth Coast Crow's Nest we all know and love, to try to dismiss these allegations out of hand. And I think it's critical to understand, if anything, that love and nostalgia that we have for Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest, we should make sure to use that to stand with these workers and these very critical complaints and allegations that they're making. So let me actually get to the substance of what the workers are alleging, and kind of how this kind of blew up on Reddit. And among other things, we're talking about a workforce over at Crow's Nest that they are overworked, they're underpaid. Several of them have spoke about getting sick more often than other workplaces they usually go to. It is worth noting, Crow's Nest slash Fourth Coast is in an older building. It is known to have mold problems. They said there are rampant issues with mice and cockroaches. One of the workers alleged that a customer actually drank a cockroach the other day. Um, Talking about, again, for part of Fourth Coast, it's not just a coffee shop, it's a bakery, alleging that sometimes the mice have gotten at the bread. Sometimes some of the dishware that's been set out has kind of, you can tell by like mice droppings, they've gotten onto the plates and the dishware. Um, and that roaches have commonly gotten, you know, made their home in the espresso machine. There's also been some very pertinent allegations about just general lack of care for the workers' well-being, alleging that management has, kind of pushed workers to, long hours, low pay, um, in conditions where they're expected to work sick, and they aren't given proper leeway for pertinent medical conditions. By one quote, we the one worker is alleging that paychecks came in around $400 to $700 biweekly. Now, on the lighter end, or I'd say, like say, on the more higher paid end, that amounts to about $1,400 a month. Now, if you are living in Kalamazoo, the median rent of any many apartments is around between eight to $1,000 a month, $800 to $1,000 a month. That's close to half your monthly pay that you're paying in rent, setting aside all other bills. So what eventually, what that amounts to is a lot of these workers at, again, one of Kalamazoo's most beloved neighborhood institutions, are essentially being paid these poverty wages where they can barely survive. And kind of saying too, it doesn't match up necessarily with what is being said on, job recruitment websites like Indeed. And also just kind of alleging a sort of kind of lack of care from management. There's one quote I want to paraphrase that really hit me in particular, talking about having to bleach the prep tables every morning because of mouse droppings, and the owner saying something to the effect, "It's just that time of year." There's also, several really pertinent allegations of kind of sexual harassment and kind of inappropriate discussions being occurring in the workplace from management over at Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest. And again, a lot of the sanitary issues we're talking about are pretty nasty. Talking about roaches crawling on prep tables, sauce bottles, cups, and as I mentioned earlier, the espresso machine. I do want to mention ahead of all of these allegations, which while these are I can confirm that they're from people who have worked at Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest. As of their most recent health inspection, that was June 2023, Fourth Coast slash Crow's Nest did pass it without any violations. There is some discussion, particularly in the Reddit thread, about why that is, and we will link to that in the show notes, of course. Um, but I did, want to make sure, it's important to point that out, uh, you know, uh, for the sake of accuracy. And something else that's kind of been kind of gone around both on Reddit and Facebook is, why are these allegations being made anonymously? And I kind of wanted to take a moment to explain that. It's much in the same way that if you are a journalist, you want to protect your sources. Now, of course, this isn't, same scale as, revealing government secrets, but when you live in a neighborhood and your bread and butter is over at the bakery that is, um, kind of violating your rights as a worker, as well as, not maintaining sanitary conditions, it can be very difficult to come forward and discuss these allegations out in the open because retaliation is a very real thing. And while we do have labor provisions and laws that are set up to try to protect workers from that sort of thing, any legal process is, of course, arduous. And if you are just scraping by, paycheck to paycheck, getting engaged in some litigation may not be something that you are necessarily looking for or have the capacity to deal with. And it's also worth noting, a lot of folks who work at places like Fourth Coast, Crow's Nest, a lot of them, they live in the neighborhood. It's convenient to get down there. We do have a public transportation system, of course, but um, especially most of the lines only run once an hour. As somebody who has a working class gig and I do not own a vehicle, it can be difficult to time out getting to your job on time on the bus line. So if you do have somewhere you can walk, or somewhere to work within walking distance, that can be a particular selling point. Now, I wanted to kind of loop it back into that discussion of the nostalgia the community has for Coast slash Crow's Nest. And one thing that is very interesting in these Reddit threads and all these commentaries on Facebook is, we've had other stories about workers organizing in Kalamazoo. Maru comes to mind, trying to organize restaurant workers. But there's something very unique about this one that I think really needs to be touched on. And part of it is the workers themselves, everything they have kind of laid out in this Reddit thread and, who I've engaged with on Facebook, both, current workers and workers who, people who used to work there, is that they recognize the community's affection and nostalgia for this institution. And they want to see it prosper. This isn't just a situation where, it's like, our demands are, take it down with us. There's very explicit language about how, they want to save this restaurant. Um, and, particularly some pointed criticism of John Talbot, who's the management, kind of alleging that they don't really care about Kalamazoo, that they don't want to allow the poor decisions of management to sink Fourth Crows slash Crow's Nest, because there's this recognition that it is this institution in the Vine neighborhood people have been going to for many years. As some other friends and colleagues who've been tapped into the community have pointed out, that was always really not necessarily because of any particular management, but because of the staff and the community that worked there. Even if you think back to just 10 years ago or so, you walk into Fourth Coast, there's some indie music playing, you find local music on the wall, there's anarchist zines stacked near the board games and crossword puzzles and stuff. And I want to say, I don't know necessarily if the workers of Fourth Coast Crow's Nest are going to end up listening to this, but as somebody who is kind of a lefty radio host and has done some socialist organizing, labor organizing myself, the unique thing about Crow's Nest or Fourth Coast is that because that affection that the community has for the institution, while as I mentioned earlier, could in a toxic way be weaponized by management to try to dismiss these very critical health, safety, and quality of life complaints that the workers have. This is also something I really think the workers could use to their advantage, which is to say, if the workers try to organize to get better pay, to get better working conditions, to have a more sanitary workplace that doesn't, make them or their customers sick, deal with the pest infestations, they have some unique leverage that I think other, food service workers in towns who've had to organize in the past necessarily haven't, which is that they are part of this long legacy. They are the stewards of this communal space in the middle of the Vine neighborhood. And I really think, whatever the workers over at Crow's Nest decide to do, however they decide to do it, I really think, get their message out there. The community will have their backs. I know this particular radio host certainly will. And again, we'll keep everybody posted about this story as it develops. It's probably not the last that we've heard about it. But, again, this is something that was really popping into the surface over the weekend. I wanted to kind of do my due diligence to make sure all this stuff was, kind of valid and able to put on air. But I am kind of talking about this with the urgency again. There hasn't been anything totally solid. I will say the initial Reddit thread was urging boycott Crow's Nest and Fourth Coast Cafe. Again, if that is what the workers decide to do, I hope that like organizes into a concerted effort. Um, and we're going to be following this story as it develops. Again, all solidarity and power to the workers at Crow's Nest and Fourth Coast. And I don't know if John Talbot is listening. It sounds like you really need to listen to your workers. Um, and again, the community is going to be very upset if your stewardship of this community institution is even half as bad as is being depicted by the people in this Reddit thread. And as leftists, I gotta say, here's what I would really like to see. I really feel like Crow's Nest, Fourth Coast, it belongs to the community, and it should like really concretely belong to the community. I hope in my my heart of hearts, this situation could develop in such a way that maybe we, the people of Kalamazoo, could turn Crow's Nest and Fourth Coast into a workers' co-op owned by the people who work there with better working conditions, better pay, and sanitary conditions where none of us have to worry about any cockroaches or whatnot getting into our coffee. So anyway, we will link to that Reddit thread in our show notes, and we will keep everybody posted about the story as it develops. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. We're going to take a quick little break. We come back, we're going to talk about some Michigan stories. Keep the dial locked. This is Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. Everybody out there in radio land, I'm your host, Andy Argo, and y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or widerfm.org. Before we get back into the all the news and the hard truths for all the youth out there, what a quick station reminder. So we're going to be starting up another live show. We're going to have the capacity to have live music in studio again. And we're actually kind of running a public poll. So we're going to be starting again a live music on air again. And we need help figuring out a name. So the name of the old show was The Basement Show, which again kind of reflects or reflected the basement show culture of Kalamazoo. But we want a new name that kind of reflects our new space. It's got this nice spiffy studio here right in the student center now. So if you go onto the Wider app, which you can find on the App Store and Google Play Store, we're running a poll on what the name is going to be. It's running till April 1st. And the 5 choices are the following. Number 1, the People's Concert. Number 2, the Beat. Number 3, Wider Live. Number 4, Ahead of the Curve. And number 5, Wider Live Wired. So yeah, again, you want to figure out what we're going to be calling our new live show, please download the Wider app and make your decision. So next thing we want to talk about, we got some updates about the Line 5 pipeline up in the Mackinac Straits. It's been, again, a big thorn in the side for environmental activists for going on 6 or 7 decades now. And we've kind of talked on the show many times about the legal back and forth of trying to issue Enbridge a cease and desist on trying to rebuild that ticking time bomb right in the Mackinac Straits. Again, as we pointed out time and time again, it's in the Mackinac Straits. It's right in that crux where the Great Lakes meet. It is literally the worst place, one of the worst places in the world to put an oil pipeline. If there was ever a leak, it would be ecologically disastrous in ways it's hard to fathom. And of course, if that leak happened in a particularly cold winter, then you're talking about trying to clean up an oil spill under with a thickness of ice. So bad news. But as we're saying in the courts, it's really been going back and forth on what the state of Michigan can do about the pipeline. Attorney General Dana Nessel has been attempting to get the pipeline legally stopped, but now there is a very large possibility it's going to be kicked up to federal court, and of course, federal court is generally more sympathetic to more. No, not to say that statewide courts are not also sympathetic to corporate interests, but a federal court is a little bit more sympathetic to uh, corporations. A statewide court is also kind of trying to think about what is in the best interest of the state of Michigan. A federal court doesn't really have to deal with that abstraction, so they're more likely to side with the corporation. So this is from an article from Bridge, Michigan. 5 years into Line 5 fight, Nessel fears having to start all over again. Nearly 5 years into a protracted legal battle over the Line 5 oil pipeline in the Straits of Mackinac, Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel fears that keeping the case in federal court would drag the case out even longer. At a federal appeals court hearing in Cincinnati, Nessel argued that ongoing litigation between the state of Michigan and Enbridge, the owner of Line 5, belongs in state courts, where she initially filed the 2019 lawsuit to close the pipeline due to potential oil spill hazards. In 2021, attorneys for Enbridge argued the state has no authority to order the pipeline closed because pipeline safety regulation is a federal matter. U.S. District Judge Janet Neff agreed in 2022, chiding state lawyers for attempting to perpetuate a forum battle. Nessel was allowed to Nessel was allowed to appeal and told Bridge, Michigan ahead of Thursday's court hearing that she's even more concerned about the safety of the decades-old pipeline now than when she initially brought the suit, noting a federal trial would potentially delay resolution for years. We're not going to stop litigating just because it's in federal court. It's just that really we'd be in a place where we'd have to start all over again. The issue of which court holds jurisdiction is now a critical detail in the legal battle over whether Enbridge can continue operating Line 5. In general, legal scholars have said, Nessel is more likely to prevail if this case is heard in state court, while Enbridge is more likely to prevail in federal court. That's because federal courts are generally more supportive of federal oversight, while state courts are more likely to uphold states' authority. Federal courts also tend to lean more conservative, while Michigan's highest court has a 4-3 majority of Democratic appointees. Going on, Nessel contends the dispute is about more than just the pipeline. She's concerned the case could set a precedent for state-level litigants seeking a more favorable venue at the federal level. Enbridge doesn't get two bites at the apple, she said. They don't get to litigate in state court, see how it's going to decide whether or not they think it's going to be a favorable ruling, and before they get on a favorable ruling, move over to federal courts. It's a delaying tactic. Nessel and Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a fellow Democrat, have vowed since their first campaigns for office in 2018 that shutting down the Canada-based Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline would be a top priority. Both have tried, but so far, their efforts have failed. So going on just again, if you want to read that article in full, that is from Bridge, Michigan, 5 years into Line 5 fight, Nessel fears having to start all over again. Quick reminder, Enbridge is also the same oil company that was most directly responsible for the infamous Kalamazoo oil spill, which happened about 14 years ago now. It's the biggest inland oil spill in U.S. history at that time and led into disastrous effects for both the ecology of Southwest Michigan and Lots of long-term health conditions and cancers for people living along the river. Um, they were also exposed later on. Enbridge, for not doing a proper cleanup job in the first place, had to come essentially just kind of bury dirt over the oil spill. Had to go back several years later and do a more proper job. So just to give you some context of who Enbridge is, what happens when oil spills, and the half arsed way that they clean it up to the detriment of the environment and public health. So with that, I want to go to another Michigan story, and then after that, we're going to kind of go into some international coverage, talking a little bit more about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. But I want to talk a little bit about so there's this story coming out of Ann Arbor that I think is really reflective of the bind a lot of um, area schools are in right now, because we are looking at the tail end of a lot of these extra COVID funds schools were getting as part of the American Rescue Plan. And we're going back to a status quo of austerity, tightening our belts, that is going to be much to the detriment of many of our most vital public institutions, such as our public schools. So, this is another article from Bridge, Michigan. As COVID cliff looms for Michigan schools, Ann Arbor faces cuts and layoffs. District leaders in the affluent community say a confluence of factors led to financial woes for the school system. The district has increased staffing, saw enrollment shrink, and raised wages for staffers in recent years. Ann Arbor struggles are unique, but come amid a looming threat for districts across the country. A massive influx of pandemic relief funding from the federal government is running out, creating a perfect storm for districts who also lost students during COVID-19 and have seen costs increase with inflation. It's what many have called the COVID cliff, a major funding loss only partially offset by increased state spending in Michigan. The vast majority of school districts are going to see their budgets decline from a revenue standpoint with the loss of these one time federal dollars, said Craig Thiel, research director for the Citizens Research Council, a nonpartisan organization based in Lansing. Some districts are seeing that sooner than others. Ann Arbor might be an example. And at the same time that money is going away, the long term trend has been schools have been losing enrollment. Michigan school districts received roughly $6 billion in federal pandemic relief aid designed to help them respond to and recover from the pandemic. The last round of funds must be spent by the end of September. As that money runs out, many districts will need to right size their budgets, according to a recent national analysis by the nonprofit Brookings Institution. This is likely to involve painful cuts, the type that can consume leaders in any district. The cuts will be especially challenging in districts that use relief money to add staff or maintain excess capacity that they would not have been able to afford otherwise. In Michigan, the pending loss of COVID funding combined with falling enrollment numbers means many districts may face the prospect of whether to close buildings to ensure their long term fiscal stability. So, going on, I wanted to kind of just again, so there, it goes a little bit more into the weeds talking about Ann Arbor, but I wanted to kind of skip down a little bit, talking more broadly about other Michigan states. More than 20 Michigan school districts that began the pandemic with fund balances of less than 15% saw their savings shrink even over the course of COVID-19, according to analysis by Teal from the Citizens Research Council. In the Upper Peninsula, Taclomanin area schools fund balance has dropped from 11% pre-pandemic to 4% in 2023. Prior to COVID, we were on a very good trajectory, but there's some work that we still need to do, said Superintendent Stacy Price. Our declining enrollment still, bites us a little bit. It's just we live in an area where the draw for employment for parents is not there. Taclomanin faced significant costs over the last few years, including making repairs on a 92-year-old building and repairs on an aging bus fleet, Price said. The district ultimately used its pandemic funds to purchase new buses, but there were delays in those getting to the district, she said. Taquamenon is one of 16 districts the state treasury department has flagged for financial distress as of March 1st, and it's one of 4 districts added to the state's early warning list so far this year. Price said the district will be meeting with the department monthly, and she anticipates spending cuts will be necessary. I'm not happy with it, she said of the district's balance sheet. It's not in a great spot. We need to look at that and make it sustainable and constant moving forward. Skipping down a little bit, talking more specifically about these enrollment problems. Statewide, Michigan public schools lost nearly 62,000 students in the fall of 2020 as parents reacted to decisions to keep classes online or in person. Although 6,000 students returned in 2021, enrollment figures dropped again in 2022 and 2023. Last June, Detroit Public Schools Community District board members cited enrollment declines in the end of pandemic funds and approving a 2024 budget with roughly $300 million in cuts. Last fall, Wayne Westland Community Schools announced 39 part time and full time layoffs effective this semester, and the district had explored whether to privatize transportation services as a way to cut costs. And we've been feeling this in Kalamazoo as well a little bit. I think too back to we were having a huge shortage of bus drivers and bus transportation for parents for a long time. And even though a lot of parents and students are drawn to Kalamazoo because of the Kalamazoo Promise, they have also kind of felt this tight squeeze of post-pandemic austerity that we've been seeing across the state and across the country. Now, just to zoom out a little bit with some of my, patented socialist Marxist commentary, why are we in this crisis to begin with? And the bottom line here is that the increased funding that these schools were getting from the American Rescue Plan, post COVID, etc., that should have been the status quo. In fact, really, our school system should have been been getting funded above and beyond that. This all goes to how the U.S. prioritizes education funding versus everything else, which to say it does not. Even under Democratic administrations, we have seen schools be deprioritized. It was only just a few years ago that we were reporting on a story about Governor Gretchen Whitmer trying to shut down Benton Harbor public schools rather than invest the money necessary to make it a flourishing school district again. And as we've said many times before, America is the richest country in the history of planet Earth. There is money in that banana stand. Unfortunately, most of our tax money is used to either bail out or give incentives to billionaires, or a bloated military industrial complex that is more often than not sending our young people abroad to fight for corporations or sending extra arms to genocidal states like Israel. So, we're seeing a sea change now. A lot of young people are starting to recognize this. Many of us have done our own research on capitalism, uh, and as the internet has been an accessible tool for us. And many young people are increasingly coming to the conclusion that this government's budgetary priorities are all out of whack. And, hopefully we can see a future where we properly fund education with the resources that we plentifully have at hand. So again, if you want to read that article in full, that is from Bridge, Michigan. As COVID cliff looms for Michigan schools, Ann Arbor faces cuts and layoffs. We're going to take a quick little break and come back. We're going to talk a little bit about some international stories. Give you an update on what's going on in Gaza. There was a ceasefire resolution from the UN. We're going to kind of put that under the microscope. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Argentina. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. I'm your host, Andy Argo. We've got some more issues to talk about coming up in the second hour here. We're going to talk about a few more international issues. Sorry, my camera's out of focus. It's bugging me. So we're going to talk about a few more international issues, and then we're going to spend probably the last 45 minutes or so of the show um, with one of our kind of greatest hits, kind of in preparation for next week, which is Easter. So this next thing, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the ceasefire resolution coming out of the UN. And, little caveat, I do want to say the national efforts for solidarity for the people of Palestine, for the people of Gaza. We should look at this as a victory. It is bearing fruit. We are, putting a tremendous amount of pressure on the US empire to do things that honestly, even just a few years ago, I would have had a hard time really imagining. Even the United States abstaining from a ceasefire resolution in regards to what Israel is doing to the people of Palestine. But I think that all the credit in the world goes to all of you who have been out there in the streets, calling your Congress people, um, engaging in boycott, divestment, and sanctions, spreading awareness of what's going on in Gaza, because this would not have happened without everybody out there doing what you're doing. Um, and I saw this interesting report or study that said half of Americans don't know, are unaware who is getting killed the most in this conflict, Israelis or Palestinians, which simultaneously sounds extremely depressing and kind of speaks to the still outsized role and power of U.S. capitalist media in controlling the narrative. But glass half full, that means half of Americans are aware of what carnage the government is doing with our tax dollars and in our name, which for the people who have been managing the apartheid state of Israel over the past several decades is a rather terrifying development. So I said all that good news just to kind of massage you into me diving a little deeper and critiquing this news about the ceasefire resolution, which the big thing I'm going to say right off the bat, it's another one of these bogus junk temporary ceasefires. They're talking about a ceasefire until the end of Ramadan. That's 2 weeks. That is some nonsense. I'm sorry. It's like, it's like, oh yeah, ceasefire next 2 weeks. So we're gonna pause the genocide for like 2 weeks, and then we're just gonna go back to just killing you and massacre. Yeah. Hooray. Yes. Thanks a bunch. Um, but it is important to note, up until this point, US was not even willing to consider that and was actively vetoing every resolution coming out of the UN demanding any ceasefire, temporary or not. But I was listening to Democracy Now! This morning, and they were interviewing an attorney. Sorry, excuse me. They were interviewing Craig Mockaber, who is an international human rights lawyer. They used to serve as the director of the New York office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. They resigned in protest because they felt the UN was not doing enough. And this was back in October to address the atrocities against the Palestinian people. And they laid out a very substantive critique of the ceasefire resolution that was just passed in the UN. And I wanted to quote from them directly. I have to say that this ceasefire follows just a few days after the Council rejected a rather cynical draft that was submitted by the United States, the text of which, I have said, is a kind of an anti ceasefire resolution. It didn't order a ceasefire, but effectively set out Israel's conditions for ceasing its violations of international law. And that was a real problem because a lot of US media outlets were reporting on that resolution as a ceasefire resolution when it was anything but. That part is very important, especially thinking about how, if you're just getting your news from the mainstream media, you're probably not going to have a very clear idea of what is actually going on in Gaza. But yesterday's resolution was an actual ceasefire resolution, a rather weak one, which I will comment on, but it was a ceasefire resolution. It calls for a brief ceasefire, for access for humanitarian aid at scale, for lawful treatment of prisoners, including Palestinian prisoners, and for a release of hostages. And it's important because, we're in the middle of it, in the midst of a genocide. And you have this nearly moribund Security Council that has failed for 6 months that is finally succeeding, at least in demanding a temporary ceasefire. Any pause will save lives, and any aid that gets in as a result during an imposed starvation will make a difference, no doubt about it. It's also important because it's a signal, again, of the very broad consensus across the global community against Israel's onslaught on Gaza. And it will be another legal tool that can help in holding perpetrators accountable after the provisional order of the World Court on Israel's genocide. But unfortunately, while it contains some hopeful aspirational language that may lead to a lasting ceasefire, it only demands a ceasefire during the month of Ramadan, which will end in just over 2 weeks. So it is a very short pause during this genocide. And we know that one of the US's conditions for not vetoing the resolution was the deletion of the word permanent, which of course changes the substance of the resolution very significantly. So, despite all this talk about tensions in US Israeli relations and this rare instance of the US not vetoing a resolution on Israel's behalf, the US is clearly continuing to run interference on behalf of Israel at the UN. And as you say, this is made all the more clear by the statements of the US immediately after the adoption of the resolution, in which the US has claimed, entirely falsely, by the way, that the ceasefire demand is conditional on the release of hostages, and secondly, that the resolution itself is non binding. And I really want to bring specific attention to this because it's something that's being repeated a lot in US media. And I want to be clear. The United States government is literally lying, legally lying about what the ceasefire is binding. It is not non-binding, but they are claiming that it is. Going on, Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, made these claims in the session of the Security Council after the adoption of the resolution, claiming that the ceasefire resolution was non binding. Both of these claims are completely false and have no legal grounding. The UN Charter and its Article 25, subsequent decisions of the International Court of Justice have made this indisputable. Security Council resolutions are binding on all member states, including the US. And this is black letter law in the Charter that says all members of the United Nations are bound to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council, as I say, subsequently affirmed by the International Court of Justice. The claim that the ceasefire is to be conditioned on other factors like the release of hostages, this is completely false as well. This was a key central focus of the negotiations, was to make sure that these things were not conditioned one on the other, but they are separate demands of the Security Council. The United States knows this, but is cynically distorting the record in order to, on the one hand, be able to claim that it has gone along or not blocked an international move towards a ceasefire because of pressure from domestic and international constituencies, and on the other hand, making sure that nothing really changes on the ground. It shows how committed the US has been to undercutting the resolution even before the ink was dry. So if you look at the process, the US used its power to water down the text during negotiations. It still did not vote in favor, only abstaining, and then immediately and falsely declared that it's non-binding and conditional. And in the end, I have to say, we also know that Israel is unlikely to respect any of the terms of this resolution. They've already declared that they will not do so, and they have continued all of their military offenses and genocidal assaults on the Gaza Strip since the adoption of this resolution. We also know that the United States is very unlikely to use any leverage to compel Israel to comply with the resolution. And their language now on trying to claim that it's non binding is evidence that that is their intent. So the killing continues, forced starvation continues, genocide continues unabated. So again, Craig Mockever, that human rights attorney, really letting us know what time it is, and for us to really understand some hard facts. While we wouldn't be at this particular juncture had it not been the months of public pressure organizers have been putting on the Biden administration. Pardon me. In substance, the U.S. government is still materially facilitating and supporting this genocide. We are still sending weapons to Israel as they are bombing innocent civilians and creating an artificial famine in the Gaza Strip. So, this ceasefire resolution that the U.S. has abstained from voting on, it should embolden us but it should embolden us to keep pushing further because there is still a lot of work to be done into twisting the U.S. empire's arm into stopping the support of this brutal genocide on the Gaza Strip. So we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in Argentina. We haven't really talked about it too much, but a right-wing demagogue recently got into power there, and the people of Argentina have really risen up in response to their prospective legislation that would have pumped a lot more austerity and rent seeking of the working class down there. So I want to talk a little bit about that situation. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Your only source for the music that makes you want to move your butt or no. That's sorry. That's my music show. Your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So this next story is going to be an international story. This is talking a little bit about the worker struggles going on down in Argentina. And we haven't really talked about this too much on the show yet, so I thought this would be a good way to kind of close out the live portion of our program. This comes to us from Left Voice. 48 years after the military coup, tens of thousands in Argentina take to the streets against denialism and the far right. On Sunday, March 24th, tens of thousands of people filled the streets of Buenos Aires and Argentina's biggest cities to demand memory, truth, and justice for the victims of state violence. This annual day of action is held in remembrance of the 30,000 people who were disappeared, murdered, or tortured during the military dictatorship of 1976 to 1983, whose atrocities are most recognizably embodied in the figure of Jorge Rafael Videla, the leader of the military junta that seized control of the government. This year, the march had renewed relevance in light of the explicit denialism advanced by the government of far-right President Javier Milei, especially in the last several weeks. Sunday's mobilizations also occurred in the context of increased struggle and resistance against the government's austerity measures. During the rise and seizure of power by the military junta from 1974 to 1983, the state crushed an entire generation of activists, young people, and workers who fought to build a society free from exploitation and oppression and who gave their lives in the struggle for liberation. As part of the Condor Plan, the Argentinian dictatorship systematically organized the political disappearance of thousands of activists who had been at the forefront of great mobilizations of the 1970s in the country. It carried out this large scale project of state sponsored violence with the political, economic, and military support of the United States and other imperialist powers. This year, the march takes on new dimensions in the era of Malay. Argentina faces an acute economic crisis that is drastically eating away at the living conditions of the working class and poor in Argentina, and which has accelerated in recent years and over the course of several administrations. Each successive government, right and left alike, has organized austerity measures in the interest of major international and national economic companies and according to the draconian measures imposed by the IMF. With Malay's rise to power, these attacks have multiplied. In just the first 3 months of his presidency, and despite suffering several significant setbacks in the implementation of his program, Malay has managed to explode the poverty rate, which has risen from 45% to 57%. Added to this is the massive devaluation of wages, high inflation, budget cuts, and layoffs in the public sector. The government has also made the privatization and defunding of state owned companies a cornerstone of its economic chainsaw plan, moving to privatize aerolíneas and Argentinians and close Argentina's state news agency Telem, measures which have already resulted in layoffs. Facing significant setbacks in its agenda, from the defeat of the omnibus law to the Senate voting to block an emergency decree that would unleash hundreds of attacks against the working class and poor, Malay's government has launched a campaign to deny the atrocities of the dictatorship. The government is preparing a potential project to release members of the dictatorship who are currently in prison. Meanwhile, Malay and Vice President Victoria Villarreal, whose grandfather and uncle took part in the vicious crimes against humanity perpetrated by the dictatorship, have made increasingly outrageous statements denying the crimes of the army, blaming the left for the violence, and challenging the number of disappearances and deaths during the junta's rule. On Sunday, the government published a 12-minute video repeating these lies. In the video and on social media, Malay's government is calling for a day for complete memory that celebrates the other dead, revitalizing an old right-wing argument that the dictatorship was necessary to respond to the terrorism of the extreme left and Peronist organizations. The Malay government's video features testimonies of family members of the military who were quote-unquote victims of the guerrilla groups, fostering lies about the period of the dictatorship and obfuscating the violence perpetrated by the state to quell class struggle and decimate the left. Of course, this discourse is not entirely new. This year, like every other year, two different sectors put out two different calls for the march. One sector is made up of organizations linked to the center-left Peronist political force. The other sector is called the Encuentro Memoria, Verdad y Justicia, the Coalition for Memory, Truth, and Justice, which includes human rights organizations as well as combative and far-left unions and workers' organizations. The coalition demands the opening of all state archives, which are still inaccessible today, in particular those that identify the people responsible for the political disappearances, the kidnapping of 500 missing children, and the crimes that were prosecuted after the fall of the dictatorship. The tens of thousands of people who took to the streets on Sunday explicitly raised demands against the far-right government and its massive attacks launched against the working class and poor. Though both sectors spoke out against Malay, the sectors linked to Peronism and its political parties and figures ignored their own complicity in the government's attacks. They ignored the conciliatory role being played by the leaderships of the country's largest unions, the CGT and the CTA, who refused to call any further actions after the January 24th strike to fight Malay's austerity, instead preferring to negotiate with the government and rely on the courts. In contrast, the other sector of the march drew in those who are organizing the fight against the far right and austerity and who have no illusions in the progressive governments that provide left cover for these policies. Human rights organizations, the left, students, and university organizations, as well as workers' organizations, flocked to the center of Buenos Aires, shouting, Son 30,000, in reference to the 30,000 people disappeared during the dictatorship, and Paro, Paro, Paro General, which translates to general strike. So, if you want to read the full article, that is from Left Voice. Headline is 48 years after the military coup, tens of thousands in Argentina take to the streets against denialism and the far right. It's published on March 25th. So, we're going to close out today's show with we're not going to be live next week. I'm taking the week off. I've got to help my family with some garbage day stuff. But next week we're going to be airing some special kind of post Easter coverage, which is going to focus on both liberation theology and how a lot of like far right evangelical institutions kind of co-opt Christianity for their far right agenda. So we're going to start this is an interview that I did about 2 years ago with journalist Catherine Joyce, who was publishing a series of articles on Salon about Hillsdale College, which is a evangelical right-wing college just to the southeast of us, which has been responsible for a lot of the right-wing legislation and scaremongering we've seen in recent years, particularly against trans and the LGBTQ plus community. So one of my pieces I'm really most proud of, we sat down and interviewed her and had a sprawling conversation about Hillsdale College and the right-wing war on public education. So I'm going to be playing about 45 minute first half of that. The second half will be next week, and we will also be playing a piece talking with Reverend Nathan Dannison about the book Jesus and John Wayne, which kind of talks about the intersection of evangelical Christianity and right-wing machismo. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution.